A black woman was not flashy dressed when she entered the hotel, so they embarrassed her and pushed her out of the hotel without knowing she is the actual mystery owner they have been hearing about. "Ma'am, please get out of here, or else I'm calling the police." "Ma'am, I don't think you realize what kind of establishment this is. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the budget hotels downtown." The words sliced through the lobby like a blade, designed to humiliate the simply dressed black woman whose wet shoes squeaked against floors. But Patricia Wells had no idea she was dismissing the one person who could destroy her career with a single phone call. The mystery owner who had just purchased the Grandview Plaza for $47 million. Hi viewers, welcome back again to my channel. Please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you will be notified whenever I share beautiful stories here. Now let's get down to the story. The rain drummed against the windows of the modest boarding house in Chicago's South Side as Amelia Baptiste folded her simple cotton dress, the same faded blue one she'd worn for 3 days straight. Her fingers, adorned with no jewelry save a thin gold band her grandmother had given her, smoothed the wrinkles with practiced care. In the cracked mirror above the dresser, she studied her reflection. Natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, minimal makeup, sensible shoes that had seen too many miles. "Perfect," she whispered to herself in her soft Barbadian accent, though perfect was the last word anyone else would use to describe her appearance. The real Amelia Baptiste owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Caribbean and had just purchased the Grandview Plaza downtown, sight unseen, through lawyers and shell companies. But tonight, she was simply a woman testing the character of the staff she now employed. Would they see her humanity beneath the humble exterior, or would they reveal the ugliness that beautiful facades often concealed? She slipped the boarding house key into her worn purse, alongside the business card that could change everything. A. Baptiste Property Acquisitions. Not that she planned to use it. This was about truth, raw and unfiltered. The memory of her first day in America 15 years ago still stung. How the immigration officer had looked at her threadbare suitcase with such disdain. How the taxi driver had asked twice if she had money for the fare. Success hadn't erased those wounds. It had only taught her to test people's hearts before revealing her hand. 15 blocks away, James Crawford straightened his tie for the 4th time and checked his watch. 10:47 p.m. The Grandview Plaza's marble lobby stretched before him like a monument to excess, all gleaming surfaces and crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars. He'd been night manager for 2 years, watching the hotel's soul slowly drain away under corporate ownership. His reflection in the polished elevator doors showed a man caught between worlds, black, educated, ambitious, yet increasingly disgusted by what ambition demanded. The staff called him soft behind his back, and said he was too kind to guests who didn't tip well, and too patient with people who didn't belong. "Maybe they're right," he muttered, adjusting his name tag. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. "Still no word on the new owner? The whole staff is nervous." James typed back, "Just rumors. Some mystery investors from the islands. Probably another corporate shark." But something in his gut hoped otherwise. The Grandview had once been different, a place where hospitality meant something beyond profit margins. Before the previous owner died and left everything tangled in legal battles, before the corporate vultures circled, before good people got replaced by those who saw dollar signs instead of human faces. The front desk manager, Patricia Wells, clicked across the marble in her designer heels, her blonde hair shellacked into submission. "James, make sure you keep the riffraff out tonight. I don't want any undesirables making our real guests uncomfortable." The way she said undesirables made his skin crawl. He'd heard that tone before, knew exactly who she meant. "Of course," he replied, hating how easily the compliance rolled off his tongue. Patricia smiled, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Good. The new owner could show up any time, and first impressions matter. We can't have the wrong sort of people cluttering up the lobby." As she walked away, James felt the familiar weight of compromise settling on his shoulders. How many times had he nodded along, chosen his paycheck over his principles. How many people had he failed to defend because speaking up felt too dangerous? The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, and somewhere across the city, two lives moved toward a collision that would change everything. James straightened his shoulders and took his position behind the concierge desk, unaware that tonight, the test of his character was walking through the rain toward his door. Have you ever made a judgment about someone based solely on their appearance, only to discover how wrong you were? The brass doors of the Grandview Plaza whispered open as Amelia stepped from the rain-soaked sidewalk into air perfumed with white roses and wealth. Her simple canvas shoes squeaked against the marble, a sound that seemed to echo through the cathedral-high lobby like an alarm. Water dripped from her modest coat onto floors that probably cost more to clean than most people made in a month. She paused, taking in the crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow fragments across ivory walls, the leather seating areas where men in $1,000 suits conducted business over cognac. This was her hotel now, every gleaming surface and gilded detail purchased with money she'd earned one honest deal at a time. Yet standing here in her humble clothes, she felt like an intruder in her own kingdom. The young woman behind the front desk, tall, blonde, sharp as broken glass, looked up from her computer screen. Her eyes traveled from Amelia's wet hair to her plain dress to her sensible shoes, and something cold flickered across her features. "Excuse me." Patricia's voice cut through the lobby's hushed atmosphere like a blade. "Can I help you?" The tone said everything the words didn't. "You don't belong here." Amelia approached the marble counter, her accent carrying the warmth of Caribbean waters. "Yes, I'd like a room, please. Something quiet." Patricia's laugh was sharp, brittle. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is the Grandview Plaza." She emphasized each word as if speaking to a child. "Our rooms start at $400 a night." "I understand." Amelia reached for her purse, the same worn leather bag she'd carried from Barbados to New York 15 years ago, the one that had held her dreams when her pockets held nothing else. "Ma'am." Patricia's voice rose, drawing stares from the lobby's scattered guests. "I don't think you realize what kind of establishment this is. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the budget hotels downtown." Heat crawled up Amelia's neck, not embarrassment but recognition. This moment, sharp as a slap, carried the weight of every dismissal she'd ever faced. The bank loan officer who'd laughed at her business plan. The supplier who'd hung up when he heard her accent. The contractors who'd assumed she was someone's secretary, not someone's boss. "I have money," she said quietly, but her voice carried steel beneath the silk. Patricia glanced toward the seating area, where two men in expensive suits had turned to watch the spectacle. Her smile was venomous. "Security?" From across the lobby, James looked up from the concierge desk where he'd been pretending to organize brochures while his stomach churned. He'd watched this scene unfold with growing horror, recognizing the cruelty in Patricia's tone, the deliberate humiliation in her theatrical performance. The security guard, a mountain named Tony who'd been kind to James during his first week, approached with reluctance clear in every step. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Please," Amelia said, and for the first time, her composure cracked just enough to reveal the pain beneath. "I just need a room." "This is private property," Patricia announced, her voice carrying across the marble expanse. "We reserve the right to refuse service." The words hung in the air like a curse. Amelia felt 15 again, standing at her first job interview in Bridgetown, watching the manager's face close when she walked through the door. Felt 25, presenting her hotel concept to investors who saw only her second-hand suit, not her first-class mind. Felt 35, successful but still fighting to be seen as more than the sum of assumptions. "I see." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the lobby's artificial silence like a prayer. Tony's hand hovered near her elbow, not touching, but ready to guide her toward the door. His eyes apologized for what his job demanded. From his position 20 feet away, James felt something break inside his chest. Every compromise he'd made, every time he'd chosen silence over courage, condensed into this single moment of moral clarity. This woman, dignified despite the humiliation, graceful under attack, deserved better than this. Deserved better than his cowardice. Wait! The word escaped before he could stop it. Patricia's head snapped toward him, her expression murderous. The lobby fell silent except for the whisper of the fountain and the drumming rain against tall windows. Amelia turned, and their eyes met across the marble expanse. Hers held pain, yes, but also a strength that made something in his chest flutter like wings. In that instant, without knowing her name or her story, he saw her, really saw her, and what he saw took his breath away. "There's been a mistake," James said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "James." Patricia's tone could have frozen fire. "Return to your duties." But he was already moving, crossing the lobby with his heart hammering against his ribs, drawn by something he couldn't name but couldn't resist. This woman, standing alone against the storm of their cruelty, deserved at least one person willing to stand with her. The moment stretched between them, loaded with possibility, heavy with the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. Rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, and in the space between heartbeats, two souls recognized something unexpected in each other. Something that looked remarkably like hope. "James." Patricia's voice sliced through the lobby's stunned silence like a scalpel. "Step away. Now." But he couldn't. Something about the way this woman held herself, shoulders straight despite the humiliation, chin lifted against the storm of their cruelty, rooted his feet to the marble floor. He'd spent 2 years watching Patricia turn hospitality into warfare, and tonight, finally, he'd found his line in the sand. "Ma'am," he said to Amelia, his voice steadier than his racing pulse, "I apologize for this treatment. It doesn't represent what this hotel should stand for." Amelia studied his face, searching for the trap she'd learned to expect in moments like these. Men had offered help before, always with strings attached, always with expectations that turned kindness into currency. But something in his eyes felt different. Genuine. Dangerous in its sincerity. "Thank you," she said carefully, "but I think it's best if I leave." The words tasted like defeat in her mouth. Part of her, the business owner, the woman who'd fought for every inch of respect she'd ever earned, wanted to reach into her purse and pull out the corporate documents that would shatter their assumptions like glass. But another part, older and more wounded, just wanted to escape before the humiliation cut any deeper. "You don't have to go anywhere," James said, and Patricia's face went volcanic. "Security, escort them both outside." Immediately. Tony shifted uncomfortably, his massive frame caught between competing authorities. "Mr. Crawford." "It's fine, Tony." James raised his hands in surrender, but his eyes never left Amelia's. "We're leaving voluntarily." "We?" Amelia's eyebrows rose. She hadn't asked for a savior, especially not one who seemed determined to torpedo his own career for a stranger. "My shift ends in 20 minutes anyway," James said, which was a lie. His shift didn't end until 6 a.m., and they both knew Patricia would never let him return after this. But something about watching this woman face their ugliness alone made keeping his job feel like a betrayal of everything he'd once believed about himself. Patricia stepped around the desk, her heels clicking like a countdown timer. "James, you have exactly 10 seconds to come to your senses before I call Mr. Harrison." The name hung in the air like a threat. Richard Harrison, the regional manager, was the kind of man who measured success in quarterly reports and viewed compassion as a liability. One call from Patricia, and James's career in hospitality would be over. "Go ahead and call him," James said, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. "Tell him I refuse to stand by while we treated a guest like garbage." "Guest?" Patricia's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Look at her, James. Look at her clothes, her shoes. She probably can't afford a room at a Motel 6, let alone here." The words hit Amelia like physical blows, each one reopening wounds she'd thought success had healed. She felt 15 again, standing in her school's financial aid office while the administrator explained why someone like her might be better suited for vocational training. Felt 25, pitching her business plan to investors who saw her threadbare blazer instead of her brilliant projections. "You don't know anything about me," Amelia said quietly, but her voice carried the weight of oceans. "I know enough." Patricia's smile was pure venom. "I know you don't belong here." James felt something snap inside his chest, a sound like breaking chains. "You're wrong." "About what?" "About everything." He turned to face Patricia fully, no longer caring about consequences. "About what hospitality means. About what this place should represent. About who belongs where." "James." "No." The word came out harder than he'd intended. "I've listened to your poison for 2 years. Watch you turn guests into profit margins and people into problems. I'm done." Tony cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Folks, I really need you to take this outside." Amelia felt the familiar weight of being someone else's burden. This man, James, his name tag read, was destroying his career for a stranger, and she couldn't let that stand. Whatever his motivations, whatever guilt or misguided chivalry drove him, she wouldn't be responsible for another person's downfall. "He's right," she said, touching James's arm gently. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through both of them. Brief, electric, dangerous. "I should go." "Don't." The word escaped before James could stop it, raw with an emotion he couldn't name. "Please." Their eyes met again, and in that instant something shifted. Not love, it was too soon for that, but recognition. Two souls who'd found each other in the wreckage of other people's cruelty. "Why?" she asked, and the simple question carried the weight of every disappointment she'd ever faced. James opened his mouth to answer, and found he had no words. Why risk everything for a stranger? Why throw away 2 years of careful career building for someone whose name he didn't even know? The logical part of his brain screamed warnings, but his heart had already made its choice. "Because it's right," he said finally. Patricia's phone was already in her hand. "Security, remove them both. And James, clean out your locker. You're finished here." As Tony approached with obvious reluctance, Amelia made her decision. She couldn't let this man, this stranger who'd shown her kindness when kindness cost him everything, face the consequences alone. "Fine," she said, gathering the tattered remains of her dignity around her like armor. "We'll leave." As they walked toward those brass doors, side by side against the storm of judgment behind them, neither could shake the feeling that they were walking toward something rather than away from it. Something that might be worth the risk. The rain had turned vicious during their confrontation, transforming Chicago's streets into rivers of reflected neon. Amelia and James stood under the Grandview's brass awning, suddenly awkward now that the adrenaline of conflict had faded into something more complicated. "You didn't have to do that," Amelia said, water dripping from her coat onto the sidewalk. Her accent seemed thicker in the cool air, musical notes that made James's chest tighten unexpectedly. "Yes, I did." He loosened his tie, the uniform of his former career feeling like a costume now. "I should have done it months ago." They stood in silence, watching the rain turn the city into an impressionist painting. Amelia pulled her thin coat tighter, and James noticed she was shivering. The boarding house where she was staying was 15 blocks away, an impossible walk in this downpour, especially for someone whose sensible shoes were already soaked through. His apartment was only 6 blocks north, but suggesting that felt presumptuous. Dangerous. Like crossing a line he couldn't uncross. "My car's in the hotel garage," he said instead. "I could give you a ride." Amelia's laugh held no humor. "I doubt they'll let us back in for your keys." As if summoned by her words, Tony emerged from the lobby, his security uniform dark with rain. He approached them with the cautious gait of a man delivering bad news. "Mr. Crawford? Ms. Wells asked me to give you this." He handed James a manila envelope. "Your final paycheck and your car keys. She had maintenance bring your vehicle around front." James stared at the keys in his palm, Ordinary metal that somehow felt heavier than they should. 2 years of his life, reduced to a parking spot and a severance check. "I'm sorry, man," Tony said quietly. "For what it's worth, you did the right thing in there." "Did I?" James looked at Amelia, who was studying the sidewalk as if it held the answers to questions she was afraid to ask. "I'm not sure." A sharp crack of thunder made them all jump, and the rain intensified to a biblical degree. Tony retreated to the dry safety of the lobby, leaving them alone with the storm and their regrets. "Look," James said, raising his voice over the weather's symphony, "my car's right there. Let me at least get you somewhere dry." Amelia hesitated. Every instinct screamed warnings about accepting help from strange men, about getting into cars with people whose motives she couldn't read. But something about the way he'd stood up to Patricia, the genuine anger in his voice when he defended her dignity, made her usual caution feel less urgent. "Just to a cab," she said. "I can call one from somewhere dry." But when they reached his car, a modest sedan that had seen better years, James's phone buzzed with a text from his rideshare app. "Due to severe weather conditions, all drivers in your area are currently unavailable." "Great," he muttered, showing her the screen. Amelia pulled out her own phone and got the same message. Then another text appeared, this one from the boarding house, "Flooding in basement. Power out. Guests were advised to find alternative accommodation tonight." She stared at the screen, feeling the universe's cruel sense of humor. Here she was, owner of a luxury hotel, locked out of her own property and stranded without shelter. The irony was so sharp it cut. "Everything okay?" James asked, noticing her expression. "The place I'm staying flooded." She didn't mention that she could afford any hotel in the city, and could call a dozen business contacts who'd rush to help. Pride had gotten her into this situation. Pride would see her through it. James ran his hands through his rain-soaked hair, weighing options that all felt loaded with implications. His apartment had a couch. She needed shelter. It was simple human decency, nothing more. So why did offering feel like standing at the edge of a cliff? "I have a place," he said carefully. "Just until the weather clears and the ride shares start running again." Amelia's first instinct was to refuse, to find some other solution that didn't involve trusting a stranger with her safety. But the rain showed no signs of stopping. Her boarding house was underwater, and something about James, the way he'd risked everything for her dignity, the careful distance he maintained even now, made her usual fears feel less justified. "I don't even know your last name," she said. "Crawford. James Crawford." He smiled for the first time since she'd met him, and it transformed his face completely. "And you are?" "Amelia." She paused, the moment of truth balanced on her tongue. Baptiste would mean nothing to him, but it was the first honest thing she'd offered. "Amelia Baptiste." "Nice to meet you, Amelia Baptiste." Even under these circumstances. Another crack of thunder decided for them. James unlocked the car doors, and they climbed into the dry sanctuary of his sedan. The space felt intimate, charged with the electricity of two lives colliding in ways neither had planned. As he started the engine, Amelia caught her reflection in the passenger window, hair damp, coat wrinkled, makeup smudged by rain and tears. She looked exactly like what Patricia had assumed, a woman with nowhere to go and no resources to change that. If only they knew the truth. But sitting in this car with this man who'd thrown away his career for her dignity, Amelia found herself wondering if the truth mattered as much as she'd always believed. James hadn't defended her because of her bank account or her business empire. He defended her because she was human, and that was enough. Maybe for tonight, being enough was revolutionary. James's apartment was exactly what Amelia had expected. Small, tidy, furnished with the careful precision of someone who understood that every purchase mattered. Books lined makeshift shelves, their spines revealing a mind that hungered for knowledge. Hospitality management texts mixed with poetry, biographies of civil rights leaders, worn copies of novels that had been read and reread. "Coffee," he offered, shrugging out of his damp jacket. "Or I have tea." My sister says I drink too much coffee, but tea would be lovely. Amelia settled onto his couch, acutely aware of how her presence transformed his space. Everything here spoke of a man who lived alone by choice, who'd created order from whatever chaos had come before. As he moved around the small kitchen, she found herself studying the photographs scattered across his bookshelf. A woman who shared his smile, surrounded by children. An older couple, formal and proud, standing in front of what looked like a church. "Your family?" she asked. "My sister Denise and her kids. My parents." His voice carried warmth, but something else too, a note of old pain. "They live in Detroit. Keep asking when I'm coming home. But you stay here." James paused in his tea preparation, steam rising between them like a curtain. "Chicago gave me something Detroit couldn't. The chance to be someone different than who I was." The kettle's whistle filled the silence, sharp and urgent. As he poured water over tea bags, Amelia noticed the careful way he moved, as if he'd learned to take up only the space he was given. "Who were you in Detroit?" she asked softly. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he brought her tea, chamomile, gentle and soothing, and settled into the chair across from her, maintaining that careful distance that had marked all their interactions. "Angry," he said finally. "Really angry. At everything, everyone. At God, at the world, at people who had things I wanted but couldn't get." He cradled his coffee mug like an anchor. "I got into trouble. Nothing serious, but enough to scare my parents. Enough to make me realize I could either change or become everything people already assumed I was." Amelia felt something shift in her chest, recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. "So you left." "Ran more like. Got a job at a hotel in downtown Chicago, started at the bottom. Housekeeping, then front desk, then management." He smiled ruefully. "I thought if I could create beautiful spaces for other people, maybe I could create something beautiful for myself too. And tonight you threw it all away." The words hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to explore. James stared into his coffee as if it held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. "Maybe it was time," he said. "Maybe I've been hiding behind good behavior for so long, I forgot what standing up actually looked like." Amelia set down her tea, the ceramic clink unnaturally loud in the small space. The moment felt balanced on a knife's edge, one where secrets could spill like blood, where truth could change everything or destroy what little they'd built. "I know something about reinvention," she said carefully. "Yeah. I came to America with nothing. Literally nothing but a suitcase and a head full of dreams that everyone said were too big for someone like me." The words came slowly, each one a test of how much truth this moment could hold. "I was 19, from a small island where people told me that girls from my neighborhood didn't become businesswomen. They cleaned houses for businesswomen." James leaned forward, drawn by something in her voice, a vulnerability that matched his own. "What changed?" "I got tired of being small." The memory surfaced like a tide, bringing with it the taste of salt air and the sound of her grandmother's voice. "My grandmother used to say that the ocean doesn't apologize for its size. She said if God made you vast, then be vast. Don't let people convince you to be a puddle when you were born to be a sea." Sounds like a wise woman. She was. She died the year I left Barbados. Never got to see. Amelia stopped herself before the words could reveal too much. Never got to see the hotels, the success, the empire built from stubbornness and dreams. See what? See that she was right. The truth and the lie tangled together like lovers. That I could be more than what people expected. James nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. "Tonight, when Patricia looked at you like that, it reminded me of everyone who ever counted me out before I'd even tried." Amelia's hands tightened around her teacup. "Every interview where they saw my accent and assumed I was uneducated. Every meeting where they looked at my clothes instead of my ideas. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be better." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, carrying 15 years of accumulated frustration. People like Patricia exist because people like us let them. Is that why you were at the hotel tonight? Testing us? The question hit like a physical blow. Amelia felt the weight of her deception settle on her shoulders, heavy as guilt. He'd risked everything for her, and she was still playing games with the truth. Something like that, she said, which wasn't quite a lie but wasn't quite honest either. James studied her face, and she felt exposed under his gaze, as if he could see through her careful omissions to the complicated woman beneath. Well, he said finally, I hope I passed. The words were light, almost joking, but his eyes held something deeper. Something that looked remarkably like hope, fragile and precious as spun glass. Amelia felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. The storm outside had settled into a steady rhythm against the windows, creating a cocoon of sound that made James's small apartment feel like the only safe place in the world. Amelia had curled into the corner of his couch, her shoes kicked off, tea warming her hands. For the first time in hours, her shoulders had relaxed. You know what's funny? She said, watching him refill her cup with the careful attention of someone who understood that hospitality was a language of love. I've stayed in hotels all over the Caribbean, across America, even in Europe. But I don't think I've ever felt as welcomed as I do right here. James paused, the kettle suspended between counter and cup. In my tiny apartment with the leaky faucet and the radiator that sounds like it's dying? Especially here. She smiled, and something in his chest fluttered like captured light. You know what real hospitality is. It's not about thread count or marble floors. It's about seeing people. Patricia never understood that. He settled back into his chair, closer this time, the careful distance between them shrinking by degrees. She thought service meant performance. Put on the right smile, say the right words, and the guests will tip well and leave good reviews. And you thought it meant something else. I thought it meant creating sanctuary. The words came easily now, loosened by the storm and her attention, and the way she listened with her whole body. Making space for people to be human, you know? To have bad days and good days, and everything in between. Amelia felt something crack open in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea, and everything to do with this man who spoke about service like it was sacred. How long had it been since someone had seen her work, her life's passion, as something more than profit margins and quarterly reports? Tell me about your first day, she said. At the hotel. Which one? The Grandview or the first hotel, where I learned what hospitality could be? The first. James smiled, the expression transforming his face completely. The Palmer House downtown. I was 22, scared out of my mind, trying so hard to be professional that I could barely speak. This older woman, Mrs. Rodriguez, was training me on housekeeping. Mrs. Rodriguez? Amelia's eyebrows rose. The name was on her restricted list, but she couldn't resist the coincidence. Yeah, she was magic. Taught me that every room we cleaned was someone's temporary home. That's the way we folded towels, arranged pillows, left chocolates on nightstands. It all mattered because people mattered. His voice grew soft with memory. She used to say that housekeeping wasn't about making things pretty. It was about making people feel worthy of beauty. The words hit Amelia like a prayer answered. This was why she'd built her hotel empire. Not for money or status, but for the radical act of creating spaces where people felt valued, seen, worthy of beauty. Hearing it from his lips felt like finding a kindred spirit in the wilderness. She sounds wonderful. She died 3 years ago. Cancer. James stared into his coffee, the weight of old grief settling on his features. I kept her picture in my locker at the Grandview. Patricia made me take it down last month. Said personal items weren't professional. That's horrible. That's when I knew I had to leave. I just didn't know how until. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Amelia felt exposed in the best possible way. Until tonight. The silence stretched between them, comfortable now, charged with possibility. Outside, the storm continued its symphony, but inside this small space, something beautiful was taking root. Can I ask you something? James said. Of course. When you were standing in that lobby tonight when when she was being cruel, what kept you from fighting back? You seemed like you could have destroyed her with words if you'd wanted to. Amelia felt the question like a gentle probe against her most tender places. The truth sat heavy on her tongue, that she could have destroyed Patricia with more than words, and could have ended her career with a single phone call. But the deeper truth was more complicated. Because I've been that angry woman before, she said quietly. In boardrooms, in meetings, anywhere people underestimated me. I learned that when you're different, when you look like me, sound like me, anger makes you dangerous instead of passionate. Strong becomes threatening. Confidence becomes arrogant. James nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his eyes. So you learned to be smaller. I learned to choose my battles. Tonight wasn't about winning. It was about seeing who would stand up when it mattered. And I almost didn't. But you did. She leaned forward, and their knees almost touched across the small space. That's what matters. You chose courage when courage had a cost. Cost me my job. Jobs come and go. Character is forever. The words hung between them like a bridge, and without quite meaning to, James reached across the space and touched her hand. The contact was electric, not just attraction, though that hummed beneath the surface, but recognition. Two souls who'd found each other in the wreckage of other people's cruelty. Amelia, he said, and her name in his voice sounded like music. Yes. I'm glad you walked into that hotel tonight. Even though it cost you everything? Maybe it didn't cost me everything. Maybe it gave me something I didn't know I was looking for. Their hands were still touching, and Amelia felt the weight of her deception like a stone in her chest. This man, this beautiful, honest man, was falling for someone who didn't exist. A woman with no money, no power, no ability to change his circumstances or heal his wounds. But looking into his eyes, she wondered if that woman might be more real than the successful businesswoman she'd spent 15 years becoming. The morning light filtered through James's apartment windows like a gentle interrogation, revealing the intimacy of the night before in harsh relief. Amelia had slept on his couch, wrapped in his spare blanket, while he'd taken the floor despite her protests. Now she sat at his small kitchen table, watching him make breakfast with the same careful attention he'd shown her tea. Her phone had been buzzing all morning, missed calls from her lawyer, her assistant, her property manager. The business world didn't pause for personal revelations or unexpected connections. She'd been ignoring the calls, but the latest voicemail made her stomach clench with dread. Ms. Baptiste, this is urgent. The Chicago Tribune is running a story tomorrow about the Grandview Plaza acquisition. They want a statement from you about the new ownership structure. Please call immediately. James looked up from the eggs he was scrambling. Everything okay? Work, she said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the weight of her deception crashed down like an avalanche. Soon, very soon, her face would be on newspaper websites. The mystery owner would have a name, a biography, a net worth that would make last night's humiliation look like theater. Must be important, the way your phone's been going off. Before she could answer, James's own phone rang. His sister's name flashed on the screen, and he answered with a smile that transformed his face. Hey Denise. You're up early. Amelia watched his expression change as he listened, the warmth draining from his features like water from a broken vessel. What do you mean it's on the news? What's on the news? Ice formed in Amelia's veins. No. Not yet. Not like this. Hold on, let me. James grabbed his laptop from the counter, his movements sharp with sudden tension. What website? The laptop screen bloomed to life, and Amelia felt the world tilt sideways. There, on the Chicago Tribune's homepage, was a headline that shattered everything. Mystery hotel heiress revealed. Barbadian businesswoman Amelia Baptiste purchases Grandview Plaza. Below the headline was a photograph. Amelia at a business conference 6 months ago, polished and powerful in a designer suit, shaking hands with a city councilman. The caption read, Baptiste, whose hospitality empire spans the Caribbean, purchased the luxury hotel through shell companies in a deal worth $47 million. The silence in the kitchen stretched like a held breath. James stared at the screen, then at her, then back at the screen. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, something that looked like betrayal. Amelia Baptiste, he said slowly, reading from the article. Owner of Baptiste Hospitality Group. Net worth estimated at over $200 million. She felt naked under his gaze, stripped of every carefully constructed layer she'd built around herself. The woman in the photograph looked nothing like the modest figure who'd sat in his apartment, accepting his charity, letting him risk everything for her dignity. James, you own the hotel. His voice was flat, emotionless. You own the Grandview Plaza. You're the mystery owner everyone's been talking about. Yes. The word fell between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples of destruction in every direction. You let me defend you to Patricia. Let me throw away my career. Let me bring you here, feed you, share my life with you. His laugh was sharp, bitter. God, you must have thought I was pathetic. No. The word came out strangled. James, no, it wasn't like that. Wasn't it? He closed the laptop with a snap that sounded like bones breaking. Rich women want to play dress up, see how the other half lives? Test the little people to see if they're worthy of her business. Each word hit like a physical blow. Amelia felt 15 years of building trust, creating connections, learning to love and be loved, crumbling around her feet. I was testing the staff, she said desperately. But not you. Never you. What happened between us? What happened between us was based on a lie. James stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor like a scream. You let me think you were someone else. Someone real. I am real. Tears burned her eyes, hot and desperate. Everything I told you was true. My grandmother coming here with nothing, facing prejudice, all of it was real. Except the part where you have enough money to buy and sell people like me. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Amelia felt them soak into her skin, confirming every fear she'd carried about letting people see behind the carefully constructed facade of her success. I never looked at you that way. Didn't you? His eyes were cold now, distant. Poor James, throwing away his little job for the mighty hotel owner. How noble. How amusing. Stop. The word came out broken. Please stop. You know what the worst part is? James moved toward the door, putting distance between them like he couldn't bear to breathe the same air. For 12 hours, I thought I'd met someone who understood what it meant to be underestimated. Someone who knew what it felt like to fight for dignity. I do know. You know what it's like to play pretend. His voice was ice and razor blades. You know what it's like to slum it with the working class for a night before going back to your penthouse. The accusation hit like a slap, and Amelia felt something break inside her chest. Something that might have been hope, or trust, or the fragile beginning of love. Get out, James said quietly. James, please. Get out of my apartment. Get out of my life. Go back to your empire and your money and your games. The final words shattered what remained of the connection they'd built. Amelia gathered her coat, her dignity, her broken heart, and walked toward the door on legs that felt like water. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. For what it's worth, you passed every test that mattered. But James had already turned away, and her words fell on ears that refused to hear them. Amelia sat in her lawyer's downtown office 12 hours later, staring at termination papers for the entire Grandview Plaza management team. Her pen hovered over the signature line, trembling with the weight of decisions that would ripple through dozens of lives. Patricia Wells, regional manager Richard Harrison, and the rest, her attorney Marcus Williams, was saying, after last night's incident, you have grounds for immediate dismissal based on discriminatory practices. It's actually a slam dunk case. She should sign. Patricia had humiliated her, treated her with the kind of casual cruelty that deserved consequences. The papers would erase every person who'd made the Grandview Plaza a place where dignity went to die. But James's words echoed in her mind, You know what it's like to slum it with the working class for a night before going back to your penthouse. Was this how she proved him wrong? By wielding her power like a sword, cutting down everyone who'd failed her test? The woman James had met wouldn't have destroyed lives out of spite. That woman would have found another way. "I need a moment," she said, pushing the papers away. Marcus frowned. "Amelia, these people need to face consequences. What they did was unconscionable." "I know, but maybe there's a better way than destroying them." She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River, watching people move like ants 30 floors below, each one carrying their own stories, their own struggles, their own desperate need to belong somewhere. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant, James Crawford's employment file attached. "You requested background on him?" She hadn't requested anything, but corporate machinery moved in mysterious ways. Opening the file felt like violating something sacred, but she couldn't stop herself. Education, community college, hospitality management degree earned while working full-time. Previous employment, 3 hotels, excellent references. Current status, terminated, Grandview Plaza. Reason, insubordination. Notes, employees consistently scored highest in guest satisfaction surveys. Known for going above and beyond for guest services. The clinical language couldn't capture the man who'd shared his tea and his truth, who'd spoken about sanctuary and service like they were sacred. But it painted a picture of someone who'd built his entire career around the belief that hospitality mattered, that people mattered. And she'd destroyed that in one night. Across the city, James sat in his sister's kitchen in Detroit, surrounded by the chaos of the family he'd fled years ago. Denise moved around him like a concerned mother hen, refilling his coffee, offering food he couldn't taste, providing comfort he couldn't accept. "So this woman," Denise said carefully, "the one you lost your job defending. She was rich the whole time. Owns the whole hotel. Probably owns half the city." James stared into his coffee like it held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. "I threw away my career for someone who could buy and sell me without thinking twice." "James." His sister sat across from him, her voice gentle but firm. "You threw away your job because you couldn't stand watching someone be cruel to another human being. That doesn't change because she turned out to have money. Doesn't it?" The words came out sharper than he'd intended. "She played me, Denise. Made me think she was vulnerable, needed protection. Meanwhile, she could have destroyed Patricia with a phone call. Could have. But she didn't." The observation hung in the air like a question mark. Why hadn't Amelia revealed herself? Why had she allowed the humiliation to continue when she had the power to stop it instantly? His phone buzzed with a notification from LinkedIn. Employment opportunity. Baptiste Hospitality Group seeks general manager for flagship property. Salary competitive, benefits exceptional. He stared at the screen, feeling the universe's cruel sense of humor. Was this her idea of an apology? Throwing money at the problem she'd created? But something made him click through to read the full posting. The job description read like his dreams made manifest. Seeking passionate hospitality professionals to create sanctuary for guests through authentic service. Must believe that hospitality is about seeing people, not profit margins. Previous experience with luxury properties preferred, but not required. Character references essential. The words sounded like his own philosophy reflected back at him. Like someone had listened to his late-night conversations about Mrs. Rodriguez and sanctuary, and the sacred art of making people feel worthy of beauty. Like someone had been paying attention when he thought no one was listening. His sister peered over his shoulder at the screen. "Sounds like someone who knows what matters to you. Or someone who knows how to manipulate what matters to me." "James." Denise's voice carried the authority of someone who'd watched him struggle through every transformation, every attempt to become someone worth being. "What if you're wrong about her?" The question hit like a physical blow. What if he was wrong? What if her tears that morning had been real? What if the woman who'd curled up on his couch, who'd shared stories about her grandmother and belonging, who'd looked at him like he was worth defending, What if that woman had been the real one? What if the money, the power, the empire were just the armor she wore to protect the vulnerable heart he'd glimpsed? His phone rang. Unknown number, but somehow he knew. The choice was balanced on the edge of a moment. Answer and risk having his heart broken again, or let it ring and spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been different. James Crawford, who'd spent 2 years choosing safety over courage, looked at his sister's encouraging face and made his choice. He answered the phone. "Hello, James." Her voice carried across the phone line like music from another world, soft, uncertain, threaded with hope and fear in equal measure. James felt his heart stop, restart, then begin racing like it was trying to escape his chest. Amelia. Her name tasted like possibility and regret. "I saw the job posting. I wasn't sure you'd answer." "I wasn't sure I would either." The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they'd said and everything they hadn't. Behind him, Denise quietly gathered her children and disappeared into the living room, understanding without words that this conversation needed sanctuary. "I'm sorry," Amelia said, and the words came out broken. "For the deception, for letting you think, for not being honest from the beginning." "Why?" The question he'd been carrying like a stone finally found its voice. "Why not tell me who you were?" "Because I've spent 15 years watching people change when they learn about money. They either want something from me, or they're intimidated by what I have. But you," her voice caught, "you defended me when you thought I had nothing. You saw me." James closed his eyes, remembering the woman who'd curled up on his couch, who'd spoken about her grandmother's wisdom and the pain of being underestimated. "You were testing everyone." "I was. But what happened between us wasn't part of any test. That was real, James. The most real thing I've felt in years." Through the kitchen window, he could see Detroit's skyline, the city that had shaped him, scarred him, sent him running toward a future he'd thought he wanted. But listening to Amelia's voice, he realized he'd been running toward her all along, even when he didn't know her name. "The job posting," he said. "It sounds like you. Like everything you told me about hospitality and sanctuary, and making people feel worthy of beauty." She paused, and he could hear her gathering courage. "I rewrote it 12 times, trying to find words that would tell you I was listening, that everything you said mattered. Amelia, I fired Patricia, Richard Harrison too. But I didn't destroy them. I'm giving them severance, references, chances to learn and grow somewhere else." Her words came faster now, tumbling over each other like a confession. "Because the woman you met in your apartment, she wouldn't have used power like a weapon. She would have chosen compassion over vengeance." James felt something crack open in his chest, the protective shell he'd built around his heart since yesterday morning. "You're offering me Patricia's job. I'm offering you the chance to build the kind of place Mrs. Rodriguez would have been proud of, where hospitality means something more than profit margins." Her voice grew soft, vulnerable. "I'm offering you the chance to create a sanctuary. And us." The words escaped before he could stop them. "What about us?" "I don't know." The honesty in her voice cut through every defense he'd built. "I know I'm falling in love with a man who risked everything for a stranger's dignity. I know I want to be the woman he thought I was. But I understand if the money, the deception, the empire, if it's all too much." James thought about the life he could have, safe, predictable, free from the complications of loving someone whose world was so much larger than his own. Then he thought about the woman who'd shared his tea and his truth, who'd looked at him like he was worth defending. "Where are you?" he asked. "The Grandview Plaza. Presidential suite." She laughed, and the sound was watery with unshed tears. "Seemed appropriate. I'll be there in 3 hours." "James." "Amelia." He stood, decision crystallizing like ice in winter air. "You said you were testing people to see if they'd stand up when it mattered." "Yes." "Well, I'm standing up. For you, for us, for whatever this could become." He grabbed his keys, his wallet, his courage. "And this time, I'm not running away from anything. I'm running toward you." The knock on the presidential suite door came exactly 3 hours later. Amelia opened it to find James standing in the hallway, still in the clothes he'd worn yesterday, hair disheveled from driving, eyes bright with determination, and something that looked remarkably like love. "You came," she said. "I came." He stepped into the opulent space, all crystal and silk in understated luxury, but his eyes never left her face. "Though I have to say, your real life is a lot fancier than your boarding house act. Is that a problem?" James looked around the suite, taking in the panoramic view of Chicago, the furniture that cost more than most people's cars, the champagne chilling in a bucket that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the same woman who'd accepted his charity, shared his couch, and opened her heart in his tiny kitchen. "No," he said simply. "It's not a problem. You're still you. Even with all this? Especially with all this." He crossed the space between them, and she felt her carefully guarded heart break open like dawn. "You could have revealed yourself that first night. Could have destroyed Patricia with a word. But you chose to let me defend you instead. Do you know what that means? Tell me." "It means you trusted me to see your worth before you showed me your wealth. It means you believe in the same things I do, that people matter more than power, that dignity is sacred, that love." He reached for her hands, and the contact sent electricity through both their souls. "That love is worth the risk." "I love you," she said, the words spilling out like water through a broken dam. "I love your integrity, your courage, your beautiful heart. I love that you stood up when it mattered. I love you too." He pulled her closer, and she could smell his cologne mixed with 3 hours of driving and the lingering scent of hope. "The real you. All of you. The woman who built an empire and the woman who curled up on my couch. The businesswoman and the dreamer. The fighter and the heart that learned to trust again." When he kissed her, it tasted like coming home and setting sail at the same time. Like sanctuary and adventure, safety and risk, everything they'd both been searching for without knowing they were lost. "So," she said against his lips, "does this mean you'll take the job?" "I'll take the job. I'll take the chance. I'll take whatever comes next, as long as it's with you." Outside the presidential suite windows, Chicago stretched toward the horizon like a promise. Inside, two souls who'd found each other in the wreckage of other people's cruelty began building something beautiful from the ashes of their fears. Love, it turned out, was the most revolutionary act of all.